hang on in his job, and that the move yesterday against Jared Kushner really reflects that Kelly's in a pretty strong position here. At the same time, he's not a member of the president's family, and actually getting rid of members of the president's family is something that nobody in this administration has accomplished.
John Kelly is a lot of things, but he will never be the president's son-in-law. Natasha, is interesting. The Washington Post also reports that Robert Mueller, the special counsel, has begun asking people about the protocols that Kushner used when he set up conversations with foreign leaders. So now there's overlap with the Mueller investigation here. Do you think that is an area that will be, of hot pursuit for the special counsel?
Absolutely, especially when you look back and think about how Jared Kushner was involved in trying to set up this back channel with the Russian ambassador during the transition period. If you'll recall, he proposed setting up a diplomatic kind of back channel at the Russian embassy with the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak. So these all kind of fit together now, and what we're going to be seeing is Mueller is going to be examining whether or not he followed protocol when he was in communication with these foreign officials. If he was not following protocol, then that would mean that H.R. McMaster, the national security advisor, and other officials in the White House would not have known the content of those conversations, which, of course, for the White House trying to manage national security is a big problem. Raises
the stakes if Bob Mueller's involved here. All right, Selena, we know that the president's base supports him, wants him to be surrounded by whichever advisor probably the president wants, but does the base really care about Jared Kushner? Are there massive Save Jared demonstrations that are going to be held in Trump counties around America?
No, there's not a hashtag Save Jared going on that I know of. Look, one of the things that, connected Trump to his base and to people who voted for him who wouldn't ordinarily vote for a character such as him was his ability to go into a place and ask for their vote. Jared was never part of that equation. And one of the things we sort of see with the Trump administration, and we don't know if this is going to be successful or not, is some companies or administrations thrive off of incredible tension, which is, what we see and hear and read about every day, and some of them sort of collapse. The way we measure that is how successful they are, not just in their approval ratings, but on things that they're able to get done. And the first big measure is how people accept what they've been doing in a midterm election. That's the first big measurement. Are you happy? Do you like the way this goes, the way the tensions and the dramas that happen every day? Or are you looking for something a little more pragmatic, a little more normal? We'll see.
Indeed. We're seeing right now, in fact. Natasha, you've got a pretty remarkable story out overnight in The Atlantic that deals with communications between Roger Stone and WikiLeaks. You obtain direct messages, essentially, between Stone and WikiLeaks. And by the way, Stone had testified that they only communicated through an intermediary. WikiLeaks had said sort of largely the same thing. What's the nature of this communication? What does it tell you?
So essentially, Roger Stone had reached out to WikiLeaks on October 13th, 2016. We don't actually know if they communicated before that, but this is the exchange that I obtained, asking WikiLeaks to essentially stop attacking him, because WikiLeaks had been going on this kind of public relations campaign, tweeting that they had no formal association with Roger Stone, who, of course, at the time was saying that he had advanced knowledge, or that implying that he had advanced knowledge of what WikiLeaks was about to drop, which, of course, was problematic for Roger Stone and the Trump campaign, because they didn't want to make it seem like there was any coordination going on. So he asked WikiLeaks if they could back off. WikiLeaks said, well, we don't want it to appear like there's any association between us, because that's undermining our documents that we're publishing. And then Roger Stone said, well, you really should learn who your friends are. You should figure out, who you want out there defending you, because right now you don't have a lot of defenders. And then on the morning of November 9th, of course, after Donald Trump did win the election, WikiLeaks reached out again and said, are you happy now? We're now free to communicate.
It's interesting. It shows they were communicating, which is something that we didn't necessarily know before. It doesn't necessarily show that they had a close relationship. But as you mentioned in the article, you haven't seen everything as far as we know.
We haven't. And Stone actually told me that he turned over a bulk of his communications, or the entirety of them, to the House Intelligence Committee, but he would not immediately share those with me. So,
Alex Burns, you have a story in the paper overnight, too, which gets to one of the other big issues facing the country right now, and it's guns, and the political implications of it, and how politicians around the country from both parties are dealing with this issue right now, politically and, I think, legislatively.
That's right, and what you really do see between the two parties is this split along geographic lines, that the pain on the Republican side is being felt by suburban politicians, folks who are closer to big cities, don't have a lot of constituents who embrace hunting culture, but do have a lot of constituents whose kids go to big high schools and elementary schools that look at an event like Parkland and just feel terrified. Those Republicans you see really trying to make some kinds of gestures in the direction of gun regulation. On the Democratic side, John, for as long as I think any of us can remember, there has been a sense, or at least 20 years, that Democrats need to do what they can to placate the NRA and to really court gun owners and to show that they're not a party that's hostile to gun rights. Often they've not been terribly successful at doing that. But really right now at a critical moment in the cycle, you have Democratic candidates for governor in places like Ohio and Minnesota who in the past have had pretty warm relationships with the NRA, trying to show that actually now they've either completely changed their minds or they've meaningfully changed their minds, and certainly that they reject NRA support.
It's super interesting to see how these politicians are moving left, right, and center in this issue all at once. All right, Selena Zito, you were a terrific reporter. If you have a spokesperson or a communications director for a politician tell you that, you know what, sometimes I tell white lies, how would that change your relationship with that person? We don't know the context of Hope Hicks, who's the president's communications director. It's unclear to me the context of what she said in the House Intelligence Committee, where she admitted she tells white lies on behalf of the president. But still, it's very unusual for someone whose job it is to disseminate information to admit that sometimes they lie.
Right. Well, I mean, I think there's this general understanding among reporters is that a lot of times communications people, especially if they're dealing it with you publicly and there's a bunch of other reporters around, you're going to get white lies. It's important to get to them to yourself and say, hey, okay, what's really going on? I need to understand this. I need to understand what's really going on. I mean, unfortunately, white lies is sort of part. I mean, I'm not saying it's acceptable, but I am saying it's sort of part of that relationship between a communications person and a press person. I did want to make a point about what Alex was talking about in terms of guns regulations, because I think it's really important right now. In that House special election in the district that I live in Pennsylvania 18, the Democrat, Connor Lamb, has come out and said that he is not for more gun regulation. He said that last week in the aftermath of what happened in Parkland. It's the first time that we have seen in a very long time someone on the Democratic side who is in the same, almost sort of in the same position as the Republican. And it's probably a good thing for the NRA because they need more Democrats, and the Democratic Party, I think, need more Democrats who are more Second Amendment friendly in terms of being able to win more elections. You see that race is tied right now. I bet that has something to do with it.
It's past the primary, though. He didn't have to deal with that issue in the primary quite the same way, where there are different implications. Selena Zito, Alex Burns, Natasha Berger, thanks so much. Great discussion. I appreciate it. Very shortly, the president meets with members of both parties. He will talk about those who've been working on the Russia probe over the last year. This has to do with the Republican memo. Jeff Sessions asked the IG to look into it. Well, moments ago, the president weighs in with a new attack on the Attorney General. The president writes, why is AG Jeff Sessions asking the Inspector General to investigate potentially massive FISA abuse? Will take forever, has no prosecutorial power, and already late with reports on Comey, etc. Isn't the IG an Obama guy? Why not use Justice Department lawyers? Disgraceful. Again, the president criticizing his Attorney General. Joining me now is the House Whip, Democratic Congressman Steny Hoyer from Maryland. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate you being here. I hope you had a chance to hear what I was just reading, this new statement from the president criticizing anew the Attorney General for calling for an investigation into FISA abuse.
Well, the president tends to call out his friends and his foes for anything that he believes are contrary to his interests. And I think that he's undermined clearly Attorney General Sessions in a lot of different ways from the very beginning. Most of all, of course, for recusing himself and therefore not being able to fully protect Trump from what the facts may show. So I think it's a continuing unfortunate modus operandi of the President of the United States to undermine law enforcement, undermine the Justice Department, undermine the FBI, undermine the credibility of anybody who's trying to get at the truth.
Put yourself in the Attorney General's shoes. I mean, he was once a lawmaker like you. Could you work like this?
I don't think so. I don't think I would tolerate being undermined in so many different ways by the person who asked me to be the Attorney General of the United States, and a person that I had supported very, very strongly and frankly, uniquely in many ways, being one of very few who were strong supporters of Trump's and believed he could win from the very beginning. But the President is loyal only to those who are absolutely and unquestionably loyal to him.
Well, on that point, Hope Hicks, his communications director, testified to the House Intelligence Committee yesterday, apparently told them that she sometimes tells white lies for her boss. Does that concern you?
Well, of course. But she didn't say what the white lies were, so we don't know how important those lies are. It doesn't sound to me like it's cleaning the swamp up. It is adding to it when Hope Hicks, who obviously is one of the president's closest advisors apparently in the White House, will not tell the truth about what's happening in the White House. The American people have the right to know what's happening, and the fact that she admits to white lies, heavens knows what else might be the case, because other than that, she was unwilling to be very forthcoming.
Look, if the Democrats do take back the House, you think there's a 90% chance, I've read you say that before. Is this the type of thing you would investigate? Would you be calling on the House Oversight Committee to be launching an investigation into this now?
Look, I think one of the reasons that Americans are going to vote for Democrats to take back the House is because they want a check and balance on this administration. Whatever they think of the administration, they obviously don't have a lot of confidence in their continuity or their transparency or truthfulness. And I think they're worried about this administration and would want to see the checks and balances that our founding fathers had in mind operate in a way that the founding fathers thought it ought to do, as a check on executive power. So that I think that clearly would be something we would be looking into, yes.
America is watching Washington today, Congressman, to see what you do on gun safety, on school safety. Yesterday, I watched Bill Pascrell stand next to you and say, Paul Ryan has lost his guts here. What do you want to see come to the House floor?
Look, we have 67% of the American people who think we ought to deal with assault weapons, which are the weapons of choice for those who want to kill a lot of people very quickly in public places, whether they be schools or restaurants or concert venues, restaurants, nightclubs. The American public want action. They certainly want action. 97% of Americans, which means the majority of Republicans, Independents, Democrats, all believe that we ought to have background checks that do not have any loopholes, that we know who are purchasing weapons, we find out whether they have mental health problems, whether they have criminal problems, whether they're domestic abuse persons, whether they're terrorists, whether they can't fly on airplanes because of the danger to the air public. The fact of the matter is America wants action. And we ought to have action. And the Speaker has said we will take on the tough issues one at a time. We'll have the courage to do that. Well, he's not doing that. He hasn't done it in so many different ways. But certainly on this issue, we've filed 2 discharge petitions. One, to make sure that everybody has a background check, and 2, that you can't get a gun until that background check is finished, not just 72 hours later. If the background check is not approved, you get the gun anyway. That's the Roof case in Charleston, where the individuals who were killed were in a church. So I think the Americans want action, they expect action, and we ought to take action.
We will see what happens today after the president meets with lawmakers of both parties. Congressman Steny Hoyer, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate your time, sir.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, I want to go now to Abby Phillip at the White House. Again, we just heard from the president moments ago, Abby, really cutting in to Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General. The Attorney General actually called for the type of investigation you might think the president wants, it's still not enough. What's going on here? What are the issues and who are the players?
Yeah, definitely, and certainly not fast enough for President Trump. This is a person who was one of the president's earliest supporters and is now, as the president has called him himself, beleaguered. This tweet, President Trump says, "Why is AG Sessions asking for the Inspector General to investigate massive FISA abuses? Will take forever and has no prosecutorial power, and already late with reports on Comey, etc." The president also is concerned, apparently, that the Inspector General is an Obama guy, a holdover from the Obama administration, and he's wondering why Sessions will not use Justice Department lawyers. Now, Sessions announced this yesterday in an effort to sort of get ahead of this issue and try to put it through what it would, under normal circumstances, be a normal Department of Justice process. Have the Inspector General look at it. The Inspector General is also already looking into how the Clinton investigation was handled, but it's clear that the President Trump is not happy with the pace of this, and he thinks Jeff Sessions should be much more aggressive. President Trump's anger with Sessions has not abated over the last several months. These attacks are still growing very public and continuing for months and months. Meanwhile, Sessions remains in the job. And, recently, when the last time President Trump attacked Sessions in this way, it was clear that, the president's advisors believed that these would continue, that he would not stop criticizing Sessions publicly, but that it was still not clear whether there was any intention to move Sessions off of this particular job. We also know that in the last year, there were a lot of efforts made to keep Sessions from resigning in the face of these criticisms from his boss. But obviously, John, this saga continues, and President Trump wants his Department of Justice to be more aggressive in investigating the prior administration, investigating the use of the foreign surveillance program in the overall Russia investigation, because that's ultimately what a lot of this is about.
He just called his Attorney General disgraceful. The President of the United States just called the Attorney General that he nominated disgraceful and is pushing for some kind of Justice Department lawyer investigation into the FBI. Abby Phillip at the White House, thank you very much. We do have more breaking news. Paul Manafort pleading not guilty to these new charges moments ago. We'll have details right after the break. For any other senator, disgraceful, he said. Let me read this to you. Why is AG Jeff Sessions asking the Inspector General to investigate potentially massive FISA abuse? Will take forever, has no prosecutorial power, and already late with reports on Comey, etc. Isn't the IG an Obama guy? Why not use Justice Department lawyers? Disgraceful, all caps, exclamation point. This comes as the president's former campaign chair pleaded not guilty to new slate of federal charges. That was Paul Manafort leaving the courthouse just moments ago. Again, pleading not guilty to these new charges, a trial date set for September. The president's son-in-law, in the meantime, has lost access to the nation's most sensitive secrets. Countries now reportedly thinking that they could play him for information. Our correspondents following this head-spinning array of developments. Let's begin at the White House and the president's comments about the Attorney General. Caitlin Collins is with me. Caitlin, what's going on here?
Yeah, that's right, John. We see this attack on Jeff Sessions coming yet again from the president on Twitter, something we've seen before. But to give a little context to what the president is saying here, this comes after Jeff Sessions did say that they are going to look into whether those applications for foreign surveillance were properly carried out. But clearly a lot of frustration from the president on this today after the press secretary, Sarah Sanders, was asked about it yesterday. She said she hadn't determined what his feelings were, but that she thought that he would be glad the Justice Department was looking into this because it was something he had certainly been frustrated by. But with this today, the president going after Michael Horowitz, I should note he's calling him an Obama guy here. And it is true that he was appointed to his current position by President Barack Obama in 2012, something he was sworn into in April 2012. But he's been in top positions at the Justice Department under Republican presidents as well. And prior to his current role, was nominated by President George W. Bush to be the commissioner on U.S. sentencing rights. And as the Inspector General, his job is to inspect these things. So this is clearly part of a larger attack from the president on his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, someone he has been very frustrated with ever since he first recused himself from overseeing the Russia investigation last March. And we've continued to see him attack him time and time again. And for context, this comes as all of these headlines about Russia are in the news. You just said that Paul Manafort is being arraigned today, with Jared Kushner as well losing his top secret interim security clearance. So a lot going on at the White House, but instead the president is choosing to take out his frustrations yet again on his Attorney General here, John.
Yeah, an awkward, angry executive time, and Jeff Sessions apparently paying the price. Caitlin Collins at the White House will come back to this issue. I want to go, though, to the D.C. federal courthouse. CNN's Jessica Snyder is there. Paul Manafort, the one-time campaign chair for Donald Trump, has just emerged. He pleaded not guilty. What have we learned?
Yeah, John, Paul Manafort maintaining his innocence in court before a judge, appearing alone before the judge. Of course, in previous appearances, he'd appeared side by side with his then co-defendant, Rick Gates. But of course, Rick Gates pleading guilty on Friday, removing him from this indictment. So Paul Manafort back in court today, pleading not guilty before this new superseding indictment. These were some new streamlined charges that the special prosecutor filed after Rick Gates pleaded guilty. So these are streamlined charges, but they are still just as serious. They include money laundering as well as false statements. Of course, Paul Manafort has come under increasing pressure just over the past week. It started with the guilty plea of that former Skadden attorney, Alex van der Zwaan. He worked for Paul Manafort. He pleaded guilty last week. And then, of course, on Friday, Rick Gates, his deputy during the Trump campaign, finally pleaded guilty to 2 counts as well. So this upping the pressure on Paul Manafort. But Paul Manafort said it on Friday after Rick Gates' guilty plea, saying that he would maintain his innocence. And then today, just a few minutes ago, before that judge, once again pleading not guilty. Of course, we saw him initially plead not guilty at the end of October when the first indictment was filed by the special counsel. Now this new superseding indictment, Paul Manafort had to go back before a judge and plead again. John, we will see Paul Manafort again in court, but that will be on Friday, and that will be in Alexandria, Virginia, because Paul Manafort faces additional charges in Virginia. These ones potentially a lot more severe. He faces 18 counts of bank fraud and tax crimes. So Paul Manafort now fighting this on 2 fronts in 2 different jurisdictions. John?
All right, Jessica Snyder at the D.C. federal courthouse, a major development in the special counsel investigation. Another major development, CNN learning overnight that the special counsel Robert Mueller and his team asking questions about business ties, financial interests that Donald Trump had from before the time he announced his candidacy for president. CNN's Kara Scannell, one of the reporters who broke this story. Kara, what have you learned?
Well, John, we've learned that Special Counsel Robert Mueller in recent weeks has been asking witnesses about the timing of Trump's decision to run for president. They've also asked whether it appeared that the Russians had any compromising information on him. And they asked about these 2 failed attempts to brand a Trump Tower in Moscow, as well as the 2013 Miss Universe pageant, which was held there. Now, President Trump has told the New York Times that it would be a red line to look into his finances and those of his family. But the special counsel Robert Mueller's mandate and his authorization is to look at anything that arose or may arise from the investigation. We've seen from the indictments and the guilty pleas that the special counsel's team is doing a very deliberate and a very thorough investigation. Now, we also had from one of our sources tell us that it wasn't clear from the questioning if Mueller had any evidence of wrongdoing. And our source told us, quote, "You can ask everything even if you don't think it's credible. The allegations are out there," and it was checking the box. John?
Kara Scannell, thank you so much for being with us and your reporting. Appreciate it. Again, but wait, there's more. The White House Communications Director, Hope Hicks, admits to the House Intelligence Committee that she told white lies for President Trump. Now, she says they weren't about anything substantial, and after talking with her lawyers, she said she never lied about anything connected to the Russia investigation. Hicks did not try to use executive privilege not to testify. But the White House told her not to answer certain questions. She did answer some questions about the presidential transition. All right, joining me now, Democratic Congressman, member of the House Intelligence Committee that oversaw that testimony from Hope Hicks yesterday, Eric Swalwell from California. Congressman, thank you very much for being with us. I got a lot to ask you. Let's start with some of the issues directly for your committee, and then we'll expand from there. Hope Hicks saying that she told white lies on behalf of the president. What's the context there? What exactly did she mean?
Well, John, I can't go into the context of that, we don't report out what witnesses say. I will just tell you that she refused to answer a number of questions as it related to the credibility of relevant witnesses in our investigation, which was quite frustrating for the questions that we had and the answers that we needed. And this is on top of efforts that we were pursuing around work that she has done in the White House as well as throughout the transition, where, again, we saw brick by brick put up in the wall to keep us away from what was going on with the Trump team and Russia.
The Washington Post, CNN, and others reporting that she did say she has told white lies for her boss. You don't want to get into the testimony, but you're not denying that happened, are you?
Again, I'm not denying it, John, but I'm not going to go into it just to kind of stay consistent on characterizing witness testimony. But I will say there were straightforward questions about the credibility of relevant witnesses in our investigation that she refused to answer.
Okay, moments ago, the President of the United States put out this statement where he attacked the Attorney General, among other things, called him disgraceful, critical of the Attorney General for launching an investigation into alleged FISA abuse in the Russia investigation. Your reaction to this?
I agree with him that it's disgraceful, but it's disgraceful because there's no evidence of any FISA abuse. So we have different problems with Jeff Sessions, but this is what it looks like when the walls start to close in. His president's son-in-law lost his security clearance yesterday. Paul Manafort was indicted for additional counts today, and I think you saw yesterday that the strategy with Hope Hicks has backfired, and so the president, as he does, is acting out.
So you don't think there should be an investigation at all, right? I mean, look, insofar as it's anyone's responsibility to look into alleged abuses, wouldn't it be the Inspector General of the Justice Department? Isn't that the right place to have these questions asked and answered?
Absolutely, but once the investigation is closed, what I don't like about this is that this investigation is ongoing, and so to try and have a live review of it as it is taking place, I think is only an effort to disrupt and obstruct it. So once the investigation is over, it's always fair game for Congress and the Inspector General, but right now I think to try and horn your way into that investigation, it only serves one purpose, which is to affect where it could go.
CNN reporting overnight that the special counsel has been asking questions about the president's finances and business dealings from the time before he was president. Has this been a focus of your investigation in the House Intelligence Committee?
Yes, John, and I'll tell you why. As you saw with Bob Mueller's indictments a few weeks back, the Russians began around 2014 their meddling in our election with the Internet Research Agency. We know that Donald Trump in 2013 in the winter went over to Moscow for the Miss Universe contest, and we knew that at the time he was considering running for president. And so what business transactions he had over there at the time and what investments he sought to make in Russia, in 2015 we know that there was an effort to put a Trump Tower in Moscow, are certainly relevant to any influence that they may have had over him.
Our reporting has been from Manu Raju and others, though, that these Republican-led committees have actually stopped short of asking too many questions about business dealings.
Well, I can tell you that the Democratic side is not stopping short, but where we are coming up short is that we don't have subpoena power. We want to subpoena Deutsche Bank. We know that that is a lender of the president's. It's a lender who has been fined before for laundering Russian money. We think that we should at least, be able to look there. And so the only records that have been subpoenaed in this case have been the bank records of Fusion GPS, which is just an effort, I think, to undermine the financial backing of that Steele dossier. We think we should, look everywhere, use our subpoena power aggressively, and be as dogged in understanding what the Russians did as the Russians were in trying to meddle in our elections.
So, Congressman, not only are you on the House Intelligence Committee, but you are a California Democrat. And the California Democratic Party over the weekend declined to endorse longtime incumbent Senator Dianne Feinstein in her re-election bid. Do you support the vote of the delegates?
I disagree with the delegates, and John, if I remember correctly, it was standing right here in this spot where I endorsed Senator Feinstein when you asked me if I would. So I'm still behind Senator Feinstein. I think you're seeing who she is in the way that she's standing up to the Trump administration, standing up for Dreamers, and doing all she can to reduce gun violence. She was the person who got the assault weapons ban passed.
What does it tell you? What does it tell you, though, that California Democrats have different concerns than you, apparently?
I think as she, tells the voters, about her record, this is a state that is growing. It's a state of immigrants. We have new voters that may not over the past decade been familiar with her, but I'm confident that once they know who she is, particularly millennial voters, that she'll be quite popular with her, and they'll know that she's going to protect them in their schools.
Congressman Eric Swalwell, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
All right, an emotional return for students at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida 2 weeks after the shooting that claimed 17 lives. Classes have now resumed. We are live there. Also this morning, Dick's Sporting Goods, one of the nation's largest sporting good retailers, says it will stop selling assault-style weapons. Plus, the president, who has had a heck of a busy morning during executive time, set to leave the White House in just moments for a ceremony on Capitol Hill honoring...
But I know I have to start. I have to face it head on. At least that's just my approach.
I'm nervous. I feel the same as her. I'm really scared to go in.
I'm still in shock from everything that has happened, and going back into school, I'm just worried that it's going to happen again.
I mean, I want to be a part of Stoneman Douglas, and I want to, live out the rest of my high school career normally, but there's no such thing as normal anymore.
And they don't know what normal is going to be. John, today is an abbreviated day. They get out in about an hour and a half, 2 hours. The kids told me they're really happy they didn't have to go to lunch today, so they wouldn't have to go sit with friend groups that had missing friends.
No such thing as normal anymore. What a heartbreaking thing for a high school student to have to say. Diane Gallagher in Parkland, Florida, thanks so much for being with us. Dick's Sporting Goods, one of the country's largest sporting goods retailers, is going to stop selling assault-style rifles like the one used in the Parkland shooting. They will also no longer sell guns to anyone under 21 years old or sell high-capacity magazines. The CEO of Dick's spoke with CNN and said he felt like he needed to take a stand.
But when you look at those kids and their parents and the grief that everyone's going through, and we don't want to be a part of this story any longer. We actually sold the shooter a shotgun in November of last year. And we looked at that and found out that we did this. We had a pit in our stomach and said, we don't want to be a part of this story, and we need a responsibility to these kids, and we decided we are not going to sell these any longer.
Now, the company had already removed assault-style rifles from all Dick's stores proper after the Sandy Hook massacre 5 years ago, but now they're going to remove them from all their affiliates, these 35 Field and Stream stores as well. No one associated with Dick's will sell these weapons anymore. All right, a lot of news breaking all over the place this morning. Right now, joining me, CNN political analyst Jackie Kucinich, CNN political commentator Scott Jennings, and Robbie Mook. Scott, I want to start with you. You worked in the Senate when Jeff Sessions was there. He is now the Attorney General of the United States. Moments ago, the president called him disgraceful. He's already called him beleaguered, very weak, and said he's very disappointed with his performance. How can Jeff Sessions stay on the job? I mean, how can he live with himself and show up to work every day with the president attacking him like that?
Well, it's rough existence. It's been some time since the president's come after Jeff Sessions in this way. These were harsh words this morning. All I can really say is that Jeff Sessions, as far as I'm concerned, is a man of high integrity. I think he served our nation well. He served the state of Alabama well. I'm glad he's in the cabinet. I think he's done amazing work at the Department of Justice, and it strikes me that what Jeff Sessions has decided is that his work on behalf of the American people as Attorney General is more important than being upset about a president who likes to communicate.
It's not being upset, though. It's
President
being
Trump
humiliated.
does. So that's all I can say about it today.
Is it being? Yeah, but again, it crosses the line from upset to humiliated here. You would think at a certain point, he should defend himself and justify the actions he's taking, saying this is the right way. And Robbie Mook, on that point, Eric Swalwell, Congressman, Democrat from California, he's actually opposed to an Inspector General investigation into alleged FISA abuses altogether. He thinks the Attorney General is going too far, while the president is saying he's not going far enough.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert on IG investigations, and so it's hard for me to weigh in either way, but I think the point that the congressman made was important, which is we need to let this investigation play out, and unfortunately, you can't trust anybody anymore. And so if the president or anybody else in the administration is calling for an IG investigation, it's either to placate the president, make him feel better about what's going on, or it's for the purpose of disrupting or blocking the investigation. And the other thing I just have to say is there's no evidence that anything was done wrong. If you look at the memo that came out from the Democrats. It's unfortunate that these memos have become partisan in the first place. There's no impropriety whatsoever. So, you know, people can make allegations, but there's no there. And again, it's just, it's so unfortunate that that's partisan. It shouldn't be.
You know, Jackie, as we watch this develop this morning, I wonder if we are all missing the forest for the trees here. You know, if you look at what's happened over the last 12 hours, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law, lost his top-level security clearance. CNN reporting overnight that the special counsel is now investigating the finances and business dealings of the president, which at one point he said was a red line. Hope Hicks tells the House Intelligence Committee that she sometimes tells white lies on behalf of the president. So is this just the president lashing out, reacting to all of it, and the only person he can find to, you know, to sort of slap is the Attorney General, taking it out on poor Jeff Sessions?
I mean, I guess because he already went after McMaster's, maybe it was last week. Maybe Jeff Sessions is just up this week. But, you know, certainly this is just another example of the president, instead of, I feel like in a normal White House, the president would, you know, take this person to task who they're unhappy with behind closed doors, perhaps through intermediaries. But instead, this president likes to put this all on Twitter, which just, it continues the chaos that on the front, that facing outward, that this White House continues to put out. You know, they like to beat that back and say everything's fine. Well, when you have the top of the government doing this over and over and over again, it doesn't really create a lot of calm, frankly, and particularly as we're getting to, as Mueller apparently or reportedly is looking into Jared Kushner. This is why nepotism laws exist, because right now you have someone who could be who could be being closed in on, and he's so close to the president that he might not remove him. I'm not familiar with the security clearance being downgraded and someone's still sticking around. Perhaps it's happened, but this certainly seems like a continually unusual situation in the West Wing.
Scott Jennings, you worked inside, you know, a White House. Jackie used the phrase "in a normal White House." You worked in the George W. Bush White House, which I suppose we could put that under the category of every other administration, a normal White House. How would this be perceived? Jared Kushner, you know, being downgraded in terms of a security clearance, what impact would that have had in the Bush administration?
Yeah, I don't recall it happening to anybody in our White House. It's an unusual situation, although I do recall it happening to one of President Obama's advisors, Ben Rhodes, I believe was denied a security clearance at the beginning of the Obama administration. Now, he ultimately got a clearance under some circumstances that are less than clear. So it's not historically unprecedented for this to occur. The president can still show any advisor he wants any kind of intelligence material that he feels like. I guess he has the right to declassify it by showing it. They're standing by Kushner today and saying that he's going to be able to continue to do his job. Ultimately, what matters here most is, do you have the confidence of the president? And Kushner retains that as of today. I think over time they'll have to make a decision about whether his inability to look at some information, if it's not declassified by the president, is prohibiting from doing the big portfolio that he has correctly. But as of right now, the confidence of the president is what you need to perform in this job, and that's what he has.
You know, Robbie, I want to ask you a question about guns. As someone who has worked for Democrats in campaigns before, you know it can be a difficult issue, a challenging issue over time. You know, you have these Democratic senators up for re-election in red states right now. You have Democrats running in primaries now where they're moving to the left on this issue a little bit and trying to prove, I think, more consciousness about the gun control measures that they might advocate for. You know, what do you think the specific challenges are facing Democrats now on this issue?
Well, I think there's a tug of war going on right now. There's a practical matter, which is that there are loopholes in the existing legal framework that allow people who shouldn't have guns to buy guns. The evidence on this keeps on mounting, and when you look at public opinion surveys out there, people overwhelmingly support background checks. People overwhelmingly support restrictions on these assault-style weapons that people can use to kill other people, or banning bump stocks, that sort of thing. Where the Republican Party, but especially the NRA, likes to take this issue is to a cultural place, that by supporting what I would argue are common sense reforms that the vast majority of Americans support, that you're somehow seeking to alienate or question people's cultural heritage, cultural identity. And that's simply not the case, and that is going to be the tug of war in these campaigns. And I would also just say there's a moral undertone to this. I don't think Democrats should hedge and make compromises on this because, they want to win some votes. People are dying, so we have to do something. But we should keep the voters focused on the practical legal loopholes that need to be closed.
Jackie, go ahead, Jackie.
If I could just add, I think one of some of the nervousness I've heard over the past 48 hours about getting the NRA involved, gun issues are an animating issue on the right. People go out and vote because of gun rights. The left hasn't shown, to an extent, it has been from some races to some races, but the gun control movement hasn't gotten out voters and hasn't had the passion to get people to the polls the same way the other side has. So that's going to be a real challenge. If we're still talking about this, the closer we get to November 2018, if the Democrats can get their people out the same way that Republicans can on the gun issue.
Jackie Kucinis, Scott Jennings, Robbie Mook, thanks so much for being with us, guys. A lot of news today. So now that Jared Kushner has had his top secret security clearance yanked, apparently, one former diplomat is asking why it didn't happen sooner. And the president set to arrive at the Capitol. All right, you're looking at live pictures from outside the U.S. Capitol right now. The president's motorcade will be arriving very, very shortly. The assembled leaders of the United States right now gathered in the Capitol Rotunda to honor the late Reverend Billy Graham, who will lie in honor in the Rotunda, which is an honor that is really provided very few non-governmental, non-military figures. But the Reverend Billy Graham obviously with an impact on so many people, so many lives. This is an honor that the leaders of Congress and the leaders of this nation thought was proper. Our Boris Sanchez standing outside as we watch the president arrive here. Boris, what are you seeing?
Hey there, John. Yeah, the president's motorcade is now arriving here at the U.S. Capitol to honor the man known as America's pastor, Billy Graham, passing away last week at his home in North Carolina at 99. He was someone who is known not only for sharing his faith with millions of Americans, but also for being influential in politics. Billy Graham served in some capacity as an advisor to presidents for many decades. He was known to have prayed with presidents dating back to Harry Truman all the way to Barack Obama. He becomes only the fourth private citizen to lie in honor here at the Capitol. He joins Rosa Parks and two Capitol Hill law enforcement officers that were killed here during a shooting back in 1998. Of course, the president is going to be joined by some of his colleagues, including House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Also on hand, Vice President Mike Pence, who called Billy Graham one of the greatest Americans of the 20th century. It'll be interesting to see just how the president commemorates this moment. Again, a historical figure by any standard, certainly one that has had a profound influence on the way that we view religion and politics over the last 50 years or so, John.
You know, it's so interesting. The Reverend Billy Graham had met with every U.S. president since Harry Truman, and as you say, Boris, had a profound impact on many of them. George W. Bush said it was one of the reasons that he stopped drinking. Richard Nixon, a close personal friend. Donald Trump has said that Billy Graham was key to his own discovery of his own faith. We're going to keep our eye on this throughout the next several minutes as leaders arrive for this ceremony. In the meantime, I want to discuss some of the other major breaking news. Jared Kushner having his security clearance, his security level downgraded. Joining me now to discuss this, Norm Eisen, former ambassador and ethics czar. He's a CNN contributor. Thanks so much for being with us, Ambassador. I appreciate it. You say that Jared Kushner should have lost this clearance long ago. Explain.
John, thanks for having me back. Mr. Kushner has exhibited all of the indicators that when I was working in the White House would have led not only to losing your security clearance, but losing your job. He omitted critical information from his financial disclosure forms. He left out, and we're talking about dozens of examples, meetings with foreign individuals on his FBI security clearance forms. He conducted his own private meetings against the advice of those in the national security establishment with figures from foreign powers. He has enormous and growing debts that make him a potential target for influence. And now we learn that foreign governments did try to influence him. So these are all the red flags. If he weren't the president's son-in-law, he would have been gone long ago, even in this administration, certainly in any prior one of either party.
Just to be clear, what the Washington Post reports is that these countries talked about the fact that they might be able to play him because of the various circumstances there. The Post also reports that the National Security Council was unaware of some of these meetings that he held with foreign countries. Isn't clear whether he held the meetings against the advice of the National Security Council. And, Abby Lowell, Jared Kushner's attorney, would say at this point they've complied with all the requests. They've gone above and beyond. And the fact that it took so long is because Jared Kushner's financial dealings are so complicated. He's a private citizen. He was a businessman. It's unusual, et cetera, et cetera. The question for you, and again, not only have you worked in ethics inside the White House, you've also worked as a U.S. ambassador. Can he fulfill his duties without the top-level security clearance?
John, there's a debate going on about whether or not Mr. Kushner can do so, and some people that I respect think he can. I am not buying it. I know how essential it is to conducting diplomacy, to have that highest level of clearance. I enjoyed it when I served our country abroad for almost 4 years. I couldn't have done my job day to day without it. Here is a man who's charged with some of the most sensitive relationships and negotiations we have, Middle East peace, Israelis and the Palestinians, broader issues in the Middle East. How on earth, if he's not fully informed, how can he represent the United States in those conversations?
Ambassador, I have time for just one more question here. Very quickly, one of the things inside the Washington Post story was that the perception within the national security community, they were so concerned about the possibility, again, that foreign countries might be able to play Jared Kushner, that it came up in the National Security Advisor's H.R. McMaster's daily intelligence briefing. What does that tell you?
It tells me that this is a major risk for the White House and for the national security of the United States, that even with the lowered security clearance, there's still a grave danger to having Jared Kushner there. He should be gone yesterday, John. Tomorrow is not soon enough.
Ambassador Norm Eisen, thanks very much for being with us. Appreciate it. I want to take you back to Capitol Hill right now. We do have live pictures. This will be a service for the late Reverend Billy Graham. This is inside the Capitol Rotunda. You can see Democrats and Republicans side by side with each other. Bipartisan, really outpouring of honor and emotion today to honor the man, where very, very shortly a ceremonious service will begin honoring the late Reverend Billy Graham. He will lie in honor inside the Capitol Rotunda, only the fourth private citizen ever to do so. We are going to watch this throughout the morning because it is a wonderful vision. The outpouring of emotion, I think, the outpouring of love, I think, for this man. You're looking at the former governor of Texas, the current Energy Secretary, Rick Perry, right there, for instance, and there are plenty of Democrats in there as well. Joining me this morning, seen as Boris Sanchez, who is covering this. Also with me, Randall Balmer, CNN contributor, chairman of the Department of Religion at Dartmouth, and Reverend Dr. Susan Johnson Cook, a former U.S. ambassador for international religious freedom and former faith advisor to President Clinton and President Obama. Boris, just very quickly, give me the tick-tock here of what we're going to see.
Hey there, John. Yeah, from what we understand, there is going to be a few remarks given by a pastor who will mark the life of Reverend Billy Graham. Then we will hear from President Trump. There will be a few ceremonious moments, and then his body will lie in honor here for the rest of the day until tomorrow when he heads back to his home in North Carolina. Obviously, this is a profound moment for so many, not just Christians, but people of all religions, as was noted by President Trump. He, as you mentioned earlier, said that the Reverend played a big role in his decision to re-look at his faith. President Trump, historically not known as a very religious man, but he clearly has rediscovered his faith in recent years. The president will be joined by other Republican leaders, including House Speaker Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. Yesterday, they spoke with reporters and said that this was an easy decision for them to make to commemorate the life of Billy Graham this way. Beyond that, John, we should note this is not without some controversy. There was at least one group yesterday that put out a statement saying that this was inappropriate. They cited some of the controversies in Billy Graham's life. Obviously, he was no stranger to controversy because of his positions. We should note, though, that as far as today, there are no protesters on hand, no distractions or any sort of involvement by any of those groups here at the Capitol. It will be a somber day, one of respect and remembrance, John.
Laura, stand by for a moment. Ambassador Johnson, or Ambassador Cook, to you, it is a vision here. It's a very rare thing when you see Republicans and Democrats gathered in the Capitol because they both want to be there together at the same time. What does that tell you about Billy Graham?
Well, it's not a political matter. I think, the words respect and remembrance are so important. It's not a political matter. He impacted everyone's lives, and, it's talking about one faith. And so together we're Americans, and he was an American pastor. And so I think that we give respect, we give honor. He did his first crusade in the year I was born. So I literally grew up with Billy Graham. My mother was North Carolinian, so you could not get in and out of North Carolina without knowing about evangelist Billy Graham. So he's had an impact, and it's so important that he's here today.
And when the remains, the casket carrying Billy Graham, when it is walked into the Capitol Rotunda, it will be the North Carolina delegation that leads it. His home state playing a big role in this. Professor Bomber, to you, again, just the fourth private citizen ever to lie in honor in the Capitol Rotunda. And that, too, tells you something about Billy Graham.
By any measure, he was an important and influential person on American life. And so, in that sense, he certainly deserves that honor.
And again, we've noted, he met every president since Harry Truman. George W. Bush credits a walk with the Reverend Billy Graham in Maine for helping him stop drinking over time. So he's had not just sort of a political impact, but also a very direct personal impact on some of our nation's leaders, Professor.
He has. Some more than others. He arranged a meeting with Harry Truman in the White House, and Harry Truman was not terribly impressed with this flamboyant young evangelist. But beginning with the Eisenhower administration, Graham managed to insinuate himself into the Eisenhower administration. He even offered to do diplomatic missions in the course of his travels around the world. He had a less close relationship with John Kennedy for a number of reasons, including Kennedy's Catholicism. But through the years, he has established at least some relationship with every American president through Barack Obama.
And again, we just saw the hearse arrive. Here is a bus, I can only imagine, that is carrying some of the family members, perhaps some of the North Carolina delegation, people who were close to the Reverend Billy Graham, who will be part of this ceremony. We do expect to hear from the leaders of Congress. We also do expect to hear from the President of the United States on this day.
Yeah, Chaplain Barry Black also, who's the chaplain for the United States Senate, which will be also important.
Why do you think he did have such a direct impact, Reverend, on political figures in this country?
Well, first of all, it's an honor. I was a faith advisor to two presidents, and so you can advise in too many ways. You can advise on issues, or you can actually be their pastor and be invited into the Oval Office. And so for him to have that impact